My family mocked me because they inherited the house and money while I only got the swamp, but what I found there made them speechless. You know that feeling when you're the punchline to a joke you never signed up for? That was my entire childhood. Jacob Hudson, the family disappointment, the spare tire, the kid who read books instead of throwing footballs. I always was the wrong son. The shadow peeking out from behind my brother Kevin's brilliant spotlight. Kevin was the future, quarterback, valedictorian, the golden child who could do no wrong. Me? I was apparently the soul of the past, lost and wandering the present with my weird thoughts and endless books. While Kevin was out there conquering the world, I was conquering the dusty corners of our local library. My grandfather Arthur was different, though. He'd sit on his old porch rocker, watching me read under the oak tree, and sometimes he'd nod like I was doing something right. Grandpa once told me, "Some things can't be rushed, Jake. They have to grow quietly in their own time." Not many words between us after that, but I felt understood, like maybe being different wasn't the worst thing in the world. The old man passed away on a Tuesday in March. Heart attack at 78. Quick and clean, just how he lived. What wasn't quick was the aftermath that followed his funeral, like a tornado through a trailer park. The will reading was scheduled for the following Saturday. Our family lawyer, Mr. Patterson, had this way of clearing his throat that made everyone nervous. He did it 17 times during that meeting. I counted. When you're used to being ignored, you notice the small stuff. Kevin got the house in town. Made sense. He was a responsible one. After all, Mom got Grandpa's savings account and his old Bible. Dad got the Chevy and the workshop tools. Standard stuff. Expected stuff. Then Patterson cleared his throat for the 18th time and looked straight at me. The property in Baymouth. All 37 acres of swampland and whatever was on it. To Jacob Hudson, with a note that said something that would haunt me for months. Look not at what is seen, but at what lives in the depths. The silence in that room was thicker than Georgia humidity in August. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Kevin's mouth actually fell open. First time I'd ever seen my perfect brother look stupid. Dad's face went through about 6 different shades of red before settling on a color that reminded me of old brick. Kevin was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying that patronizing tone he perfected in law school. I mean, what's Jacob going to do with swampland? He's never even owned a lawnmower. Dad jumped in with his usual subtle approach, drumming his fingers on the table like he did when the Falcons were losing. The boy's 24 and never held a real job. Now he gets handed 37 acres of nothing and thinks he's landed gentry. Mom was different. She got that look she'd get when the credit card bill arrived, part panic, part calculation. Jacob, honey, you have to think about this practically. That land's been sitting there doing nothing for decades. Maybe we should discuss keeping this in the family, for everyone's benefit. I sat there taking it all in, watching my family dissect my inheritance like vultures over roadkill. The funny thing about being the family disappointment is that eventually you stop caring about disappointing them. Sometimes the best gift life gives you is the clarity that comes from hitting rock bottom. That evening, Mom outdid herself with a tuna casserole that could have fed half of Georgia. The smell filled our little kitchen, mixing memories of better times with a bitter taste of current reality. She had this way of cooking when she was stressed, like she could solve family problems with enough cheese and breadcrumbs. The conversation over dinner was brutal. Mom laid into me about responsibility, about how I owed it to the family to make smart decisions. Dad questioned whether I had any idea what owning land actually meant. Kevin suggested, with that infuriating big brother wisdom, that maybe I should think about what was best for everyone involved, not just myself. I felt like a spare puzzle piece in the picture of their perfect family, a piece that didn't quite fit anywhere but couldn't be thrown away either. Then I made my mistake. I opened my mouth. I told them I was keeping the land, that I was going to figure out what Grandpa meant by his note, that maybe there was something valuable there that they couldn't see. The silence that followed was deafening. The breaking point came when Mom slammed her fork down hard enough to make the water glasses jump. Her voice cracked with frustration and something that sounded almost like fear. If you want to run off to the swamp and play mad scientist, Be my guest. Just don't come crawling back when it all falls apart, like everything else you've touched. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just weirdo this time, but mad scientist. The label that would follow me through family dinners for years to come. But something strange happened in that moment. Instead of shrinking back like I usually did, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Determination, maybe, or just the simple realization that I had nothing left to lose. I packed that night. Didn't take much. Some clothes, my books, my laptop, and the few things that actually mattered to me. Plus the $3,150 I'd saved from working at the gas station. Money I'd been putting aside for a newer truck since this 2003 Ford was barely holding together with prayer and duct tape. My old pickup became my moving van, loaded with everything I owned. Not exactly the American dream, but it was mine. The drive to Weymouth took 4 hours through back roads that seemed to get smaller and more forgotten with every mile. Interstate turned to highway. Highway turned to county road. County road turned to something that barely qualified as pavement. It was like driving backward through time, each mile taking me further from civilization and closer to whatever my grandfather had left me. The truck's radio gave up somewhere around mile marker 47, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the sound of tires on asphalt that seemed to be melting under the Georgia sun. I had plenty of time to wonder what the hell I was doing, driving toward an inheritance that everyone seemed convinced was worthless. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It's surprisingly solid ground to build on. Weymouth wasn't so much a town as it was a collection of buildings that had collectively given up on progress sometime around 1987. The main street consists of a gas station, a diner that looked like it served food you'd survive rather than enjoy, and a post office that doubled as a town social hub. Population sign said 847, but I suspected they were counting pets and maybe some optimistic wishful thinking. The heat hit me like opening an oven door when I stepped out of the truck. Southern Georgia in March had been pleasant, but Weymouth seemed to exist in its own microclimate of sticky, oppressive air that made breathing feel like work. Mosquitoes appeared within seconds, treating my arrival like a buffet announcement. Finding my grandfather's property required directions from a gas station attendant who looked at me like I'd asked for directions to Mars. You sure you want the Hudson place? That old-timer swamp? He was always a bit of an odd duck. That one, when I confirmed. He just shrugged and pointed down a dirt road that disappeared into a tunnel of Spanish moss and the smell of old decisions. That comment about Grandpa being an odd duck stuck with me. Maybe the apple didn't fall far from the tree after all. The property revealed itself gradually, like a secret being unwrapped in slow motion. First came the mailbox, leaning at an angle that suggested it was held up by stubbornness alone. Then a driveway that was more suggestion than actual road. Finally, the land itself opened up before me like a punchline to a joke I didn't understand yet. 37 acres of exactly what my family had described. Swampland. A murky pond that looked like it could hide bodies or alligators with equal ease. A barn that'd seen better decades. Its roof sporting holes that turned it into an accidental planetarium. The house, if you could call it that, was a single-wide trailer that had been around since the Carter administration. Standing there in that oppressive heat, surrounded by the symphony of insects and the smell of stagnant water, I understood why my family thought I'd lost my mind. This was an inheritance. This was punishment disguised as property ownership. But there was something else. Something in the way the late afternoon light hit the water. Something in the way the Spanish moss moved in the breeze like nature's own curtains. Maybe it was desperation talking, or maybe it was the first stirring of something I'd later recognize as hope, but I found myself thinking, this is my chance. My chance to prove to them, and more importantly to myself, that I'm not just a mad scientist, that I'm someone who can see things others miss. That first night in the trailer was an adventure in creative problem-solving. The electricity worked sporadically. The plumbing made sounds that suggested it was hosting a small rebellion, and the air conditioning unit seemed to be powered by hope and good intentions. I ate a sandwich by flashlight and tried to convince myself that this was the beginning of something, not the end of everything. The rain started around midnight, turning the world outside into a wall of water and sound. It was the kind of rain that made you believe in biblical floods, the kind that turns dirt roads into rivers and makes you question every life decision that led you to this moment. I lay on the ancient couch listening to water find every weakness in the trailer's armor, collecting it in pots and pans like some kind of indoor water feature. But storms pass. They always do. And sometimes they wash away enough of the old to make room for something new. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, the sun turning the humid air into something you could practically chew. I decided to explore the property properly, to see what exactly my grandfather had left me besides a collection of repair bills and existential questions. The barn was my first stop. Its doors hung open like tired arms, revealing decades of accumulated memories and mysteries. Farm equipment that belonged in a museum, tools that looked like they could tell stories, if you knew how to listen. And in the back corner, almost hidden behind a stack of rotting lumber, was an old wooden chest that looked like it had been waiting for me. Inside that chest, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived the humidity, was a collection that made me sit back on my heels in confusion. Fishing equipment, but not the kind you'd use for bass or catfish. Specialized tools that looked almost surgical. Measuring devices. And most intriguingly, a leather-bound journal with pages that mixed English and what looked like Japanese characters. The cover read Yukawa Method in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Inside, page after page of notes, diagrams, and observations about something called depth cultivation and 3-year maturation cycles. At the back, a hand-drawn map of the property with locations marked and numbered. Baskets, underwater baskets with notes about mollusk settlement and pearl formation optimization. That journal was like finding a message in a bottle, except the bottle was time, and the message was from a grandfather I thought I knew. Arthur Hudson, the quiet man who fixed things and kept himself, had apparently been running some kind of operation that sounded part science, part art, and part magic. The more I read, the more the pieces started fitting together in ways that made my head spin. This wasn't just swampland. This was a laboratory, a farm, a place where something valuable might actually be growing beneath the surface of that murky water. Following the map in the journal, I waded into the pond that afternoon. The water was warmer than I expected and clearer than it looked from shore. About 10 feet from the edge, my foot hit something solid, something that didn't belong on a muddy bottom. I took a deep breath and went under. The underwater world was alien and beautiful. Sunlight filtered down to the water in golden streams, illuminating a scene that looked like someone's secret garden. Baskets, dozens of them, arranged in careful rows like an underwater orchard, each one covered with mesh and weighted down with stones. My lungs were burning by the time I surfaced, but my mind was racing faster than my heart. Those baskets weren't random. They were positioned, maintained, part of a system that had been operating for years without anyone knowing. My grandfather hadn't just left me swampland. He'd left me a puzzle that was starting to make sense. That evening, I went back to the journal with new eyes. The Japanese characters started making sense when I ran them through translation apps. Akoya oysters, saltwater cultivation, pH balance, temperature control. This wasn't fishing equipment. It was aquaculture, pearl farming, in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. The storm that hit that night was even worse than the first one. Rain hammered the trailer, like nature was trying to wash me back to where I came from. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt energized. I had a mystery to solve, a legacy to understand, and for the first time in my life, something that was completely mine. I spent the night reading everything I could find online about pearl cultivation, about the Yukawa method, about how someone could possibly grow saltwater pearls in a Georgia swamp. The answers were fascinating and complex, involving careful water management, imported oyster stock, and years of patience. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and waded back into the pond. This time, I was prepared. This time, I was looking for something specific. Basket number 4, according to the map, was the oldest. 3 years and 7 months of whatever process my grandfather had been perfecting. As I worked to lift it from the bottom, Something inside told me that this moment would change everything. The basket was heavier than expected, full of life and possibility. Inside, dozens of oysters clustered together like sleeping treasures. I selected one that seemed particularly promising, carried it back to shore, and sat on the bank with the weight of anticipation pressing down on me like the Georgia humidity. Opening an oyster is like unwrapping a present from the universe. You never know what you're going to find inside. Most of the time, it's nothing special. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it's something beautiful. But once in a lifetime, if you're very lucky and you've been patient enough to wait for miracles, it's something that changes everything. The shell cracked open with a sound like a whispered secret. Inside, nestled in the soft tissue like a sleeping star, was a pearl. But not just any pearl. This one caught the morning light and threw it back in ways that made me question whether I was actually awake. Golden highlights danced across its surface like captured sunlight, and its luster was so deep it seemed to glow from within. I sat there holding that pearl as the sun climbed higher, and the world around me came alive with birdsong and insect chatter. It was real, it was beautiful, and it was mine. Not because someone had given it to me or because I'd inherited it, but because I'd found it, because I'd been brave enough to look beneath the surface when everyone else saw only murky water. That pearl wasn't just a gem. It was proof that my grandfather had seen something in me that others missed. Proof that sometimes the most valuable things in life are hidden in the places nobody else wants to look. Proof that maybe, just maybe, being different wasn't a curse after all. As I walked back toward the trailer, that golden pearl warm in my palm, I thought about the phone calls I wouldn't make. I wouldn't be calling my family to apologize. I wouldn't be asking for help or advice or validation. For the first time in my 24 years, I had something that was completely mine, something that represented not what I'd inherited but what I'd discovered. The morning sun felt different on my face. Warmer, somehow more welcoming, like it was shining just for me and my small miracle, blessing the beginning of something I couldn't yet name but could finally feel in my bones. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life are born from pressure and time and patience. Sometimes what looks like abandonment is actually freedom. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to dive beneath the surface, you find treasures that have been waiting for you all along. That pearl changed everything. Not because of its value, though I suspected it might be worth something, but because of what it represented. It was my grandfather's final gift, his way of telling me that he'd always believed I would find my way to something extraordinary. Even when everyone else saw failure, he saw potential. Look not at what is seen, but at what lives in the depths. Finally, I understood what he meant. That golden pearl, sitting on my kitchen counter, became my obsession. Not in a creepy way, but in that focused, slightly manic way that happens when you discover something that might just change your entire life. I felt like an archaeologist who'd stumbled onto King Tut's tomb, except my tomb was a moldy trailer, and my treasure was one perfect sphere that caught morning light like captured lightning. The journal became my Bible. Every morning with my gas station coffee, I'd spread those weathered pages across my card table and try to decode what my grandfather had been up to. The man was apparently part scientist, part artist, and part wizard. His handwriting looked like chicken scratches having an argument with hieroglyphics. Google Translate became my best friend and worst enemy. I'd feed it chunks of Japanese text from the journal, and it would spit back poetry that made no sense. Mystical sea mushrooms invoke soul brilliance. Deep water patience creates heaven's tears. Pearl dreams sleep in saltwater cradles. Either my grandfather was running a spiritual retreat for mollusks, or Google Translate had been drinking. But slowly, patterns emerged. Scientific terms hidden between the philosophical nonsense. Pinctada fucata. Akoya oysters. pH levels around 7.8. Temperature ranges. Circulation systems. This wasn't just some old-timer playing in mud. This was sophisticated aquaculture that belonged in textbooks, not backwoods Georgia. The deeper I dug into online pearl farming forums, the more impressed I became with what Arthur Hudson had pulled off. These Japanese techniques were cutting-edge stuff, usually requiring years of training and access to coastal facilities. Here's my grandfather, probably ordering oyster larvae through some sketchy maritime connection, creating perfect conditions in a landlocked swamp. The man was either a genius or completely insane. Maybe both. 3 weeks into my research, I hit a wall harder than a bug on a windshield. The technical details were beyond me. I needed help, and not the kind you get from YouTube videos and Wikipedia rabbit holes. I needed real expertise. The kind that comes with degrees and lab coats and the ability to look at water under a microscope without going cross-eyed. The University of Georgia Savannah campus was a 40-minute drive that felt like traveling to another planet. My beat-up Ford looked out of place among the student parking full of cars that cost more than my entire net worth. I walked into the marine biology department feeling like a fraud, carrying my grandfather's journal like some kind of mystical artifact. The grad student behind the reception desk looked at me like I'd wandered in from a time machine. Scraggly beard, clothes that smell faintly of swamp water, clutching an old leather journal, and asking about pearl cultivation. I probably looked like someone who'd been living in the woods, eating mushrooms and talking to trees. Then I met Isabella Crane. She walked out of a lab wearing safety goggles pushed up on her forehead, caramel-colored hair tied back in a messy bun that somehow looked intentional. Her eyes sparkled with the kind of intelligence that made you feel both smarter and dumber just being near her. She looked like she'd stepped out of a National Geographic documentary about brilliant scientists who also happened to be stunning. The receptionist pointed at me and said something about a guy with questions about pearls. Isabella looked me up and down with the kind of scientific assessment usually reserved for lab specimens. I expected her to politely brush me off. Instead, she tilted her head and asked if I had any actual samples. When I pulled out my golden pearl, carefully wrapped in a clean sock because I didn't own anything fancier, her expression changed completely. She went from mildly curious to laser-focused in about 2 seconds. She held that pearl up to the light, like she was reading its biography, turned it slowly, watching the way it caught and reflected the fluorescent lab lighting. Her fingers traced its surface with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Then she looked at me with new eyes, like I just transformed from swamp creature to potentially interesting human being. Her words hit me like gospel truth wrapped in scientific authority. These don't happen by accident. This isn't mass production. This is art. If you do this right, this could be the first truly unique pearl farm on the East Coast. She paused, looking at the pearl again. This could be pearls for people who've been forgotten. That last phrase knocked the wind out of me. Pearls for people who've been forgotten. She just described my entire life in 6 words. The overlooked, the dismissed, the ones who got swampland instead of savings accounts. For the first time since finding that pearl, I felt like maybe this wasn't just about proving my family wrong. Maybe it was about something bigger. Isabella agreed to help for curiosity and coffee, which seemed like the best deal I'd gotten since inheriting 37 acres of mosquito habitat. She wanted to see the operation, test the water, understand how my grandfather had managed to create conditions that shouldn't exist in nature. Her enthusiasm was infectious, like being around someone who could see the same impossible dream you were chasing. The drive back to Weymouth gave us time to talk. She told me about her research into sustainable aquaculture, about how traditional pearl farming was being industrialized to death. I told her about being the family disappointment who'd accidentally inherited a mystery. By the time we reached my property, I felt like I'd found an ally in a world that had mostly written me off. Isabella's first look at the pond was pure scientific fascination. She waded in with equipment I couldn't pronounce, taking water samples and pH readings while I stood on shore feeling like the assistant who doesn't know what he's assisting with. She moved through the water like she belonged there, completely absorbed in the data she was collecting. Her verdict was delivered with the kind of excitement usually reserved for major discoveries. Your grandfather created a perfect microenvironment. The salinity levels, the mineral content, the circulation system, it's all precisely calibrated. This shouldn't work, but it's brilliant. But brilliance doesn't pay the bills or fill out government forms. Isabella was the one who brought me back to reality with a gentle but firm reality check. If you're going to do this seriously, you need to make it legal. No shortcuts, no under-the-radar operations. The state, doesn't mess around with aquaculture. The next few weeks were an education in why most people don't start aquaculture farms in their backyard. The paperwork alone could have defeated Napoleon. Environmental impact studies, water quality permits, aquaculture licensing. Each form led to 3 more forms. Each office sent me to a different office. I felt like Sisyphus, except instead of rolling a boulder of a mountain, I was pushing papers through a bureaucracy designed by people who'd never seen an oyster outside a restaurant. The clerks looked at me like I was planning to raise dolphins in a kiddie pool. One particularly helpful individual asked if I thought I was living next to the Pacific Ocean. The real challenges came when we started working with the existing oyster stock. Some had died over the winter when the circulation system faltered. Others were contaminated when runoff from a neighbor's farm sent nitrogen levels through the roof. I watched 3 years of my grandfather's work disappearing into muddy water and wondered if my family had been right about everything. Isabella kept me sane during those early disasters. She'd show up with testing equipment and solutions to problems I didn't know existed. When the pH swung too high, she knew exactly which minerals to add. When algae blooms threatened to choke out the oysters, she had filtration ideas that actually worked. Watching her troubleshoot my grandfather's system was like watching someone speak a language I was just beginning to understand. We became a team in ways that surprised both of us. She brought scientific knowledge and problem-solving skills that turned impossible challenges into merely difficult ones. I brought determination and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that comes from having nothing left to lose. Together, we started rebuilding what my grandfather had created, making it better, making it work. The old circulation system needed complete overhaul. We spent weekends building new platforms, installing better filtration, creating monitoring systems that would have made NASA proud. Every improvement felt like we were honoring Arthur's vision while pushing it into the future. Real success comes when you surround yourself with people who can see your dream, even when they can't see it themselves. By November, we were ready for the first harvest from the baskets my grandfather had established years earlier. 38 pearls from oysters had been growing since before I knew this place existed. Each one was like unwrapping a present from the past, not knowing whether you'd find treasure or disappointment. The process was nerve-wracking and magical at the same time. Each oyster that opened was a small revelation, a secret being shared after years of patient waiting. Some held nothing but hope and good intentions. Others revealed small, imperfect pearls that caught the light like tiny stars. And a few, a precious few, contained gems that made Isabella whistle under her breath and look at me like I had just performed actual magic. The trip to Savannah to find a jeweler willing to look at our harvest felt like carrying my grandfather's legacy in a tackle box. The first 3 shops treated us like we were trying to sell costume jewelry from a gas station gift rack. The Ford jeweler, an old-timer named Marcus who'd been in business since before I was born, took one look at our best specimens and went completely silent. He examined each pearl under a jeweler's loupe with the concentration of a surgeon performing brain surgery, turned them under different lights, weighed them on scales that probably cost more than my truck. His face gave away nothing until he picked up the largest pearl, one with the same golden undertones as my first discovery, and held it up to catch the afternoon light streaming through a shop window. Marcus set the pearl down gently and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. His voice carried 40 years of professional authority when he spoke. I've seen one like this exactly once before, and that was in Tokyo, 1983. The number he wrote on a piece of paper made my hands shake. $47,000 for one pearl. One perfect, golden, impossible pearl that had grown in a Georgia swamp while I was failing algebra and disappointed my parents. The number was so absurd, so completely outside my understanding of money and value, that I asked him to write it again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The drive back to Weymouth happened in a haze of disbelief and possibility. Isabella sat quietly in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at the check in my shirt pocket, like it might disappear if we didn't keep an eye on it. We just proved that my grandfather's legacy wasn't just sentimental value wrapped in good intentions. It was real wealth, created from patience and knowledge, and the kind of vision that most people would dismiss as impossible. That night, sitting in my trailer with a check for $47,000 on my kitchen table, I thought about all the things that had led to this moment. The family dinners where I felt invisible. The inheritance everyone thought was worthless. The journal full of secrets written in languages I didn't understand. The pearl that started it all, still sitting in its place of honor next to my grandfather's photograph. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are encoded in the most unexpected forms, just like my grandfather's notes had hidden revolutionary techniques behind philosophical rambling. The pearl money meant I could afford better equipment, more oyster stock, proper facilities. But more than that, it meant validation. Proof that being different, being the one who saw possibility where others saw problems, wasn't a character flaw after all. Isabella stayed late that night, helping me plan the next phase of expansion. We sketched out ideas for new cultivation areas, discussed importing techniques from Japanese pearl farms, calculated how many oysters we could support with proper infrastructure. For the first time since leaving my family's house, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The golden pearl that started everything remained unsold, sitting in its honored place as a reminder of where this journey began. But the check in my pocket represented something even more valuable. The beginning of a future I was finally excited to live. Having $47,000 in the bank changes your perspective on a lot of things. Suddenly, ramen noodles became a choice rather than a necessity. My trailer stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like headquarters. But the real change was deeper than money. It was the knowledge that I'd been right about something important when everyone else had been wrong. Isabella suggested we take our remaining pearls to market, but not through traditional jewelry stores. She'd heard about an eco-friendly artisan fair in Austin, Texas, where people appreciated unique, sustainable products with stories behind them. The idea terrified me. I was a bookworm who'd spent most of his life talking to oysters, suddenly expected to pitch my product to strangers who probably thought pearls came from some corporate facility in the Pacific. The drive to Austin took 9 hours through landscapes that gradually shifted from Georgia swamp to Texas hill country. My truck was loaded with our carefully packaged inventory, 37 pearls of varying sizes and qualities, each one representing months or years of my grandfather's patient work. Isabella rode shotgun, coaching me on presentation techniques, and tried to convince me that I wasn't going to make a fool of myself in front of people who actually knew what they were doing. The Austin Sustainable Living Fair was exactly what you'd expect from a city that keeps things weird. Vendors selling everything from organic soap made with goat milk to solar-powered phone chargers shaped like flowers. The crowd was a mix of hippies with trust funds, young professionals trying to save the planet one purchase at a time, and actual farmers who looked like they could grow anything in concrete if necessary. Our booth was a study in humble authenticity. A folding table covered with Isabella's marine biology textbooks, my grandfather's journal open to show his hand-drawn diagrams, and our pearls displayed in simple wooden boxes I'd made from scraps found in the barn. We looked like the amateur hour compared to some of the polished displays around us, but Isabella insisted that authenticity would speak louder than fancy packaging. The first few hours were brutal. People would stop, glance at our pearls, and move on with polite smiles that translated to absolutely not. One particularly condescending woman looked at our setup and declared that real pearls came from Tahiti, not Georgia, before walking away to buy a $50 candle made from recycled wine bottles. Then something magical happened. An older gentleman in a worn cowboy hat stopped at our table and picked up one of our medium-sized pearls. He turned it over in his weathered hands with the careful attention of someone who understood quality when he saw it. His examination was thorough and respectful, like he was reading the pearl's entire history through touch alone. His first question surprised us both. How long did your grandfather work on perfecting this before you inherited it? When I told him about the 3-year cycles and the Japanese techniques, his eyebrows went up. Isabella jumped in with her scientific expertise, explaining the cultivation process that my grandfather had mastered. A small nucleus, usually a piece of shell, gets carefully inserted into the oyster's tissue. The oyster responds by coating the irritant with layers of nacre, the same substance that lines the inside of the shell. Each layer is microscopic, but over months and years, they build up to create the pearl's lustrous surface. She demonstrated with diagrams, showing how the cultivation process mimics what happens naturally but under controlled conditions. When she explained the environmental conditions my grandfather had created and the delicate timing required for the nucleation process, he whistled softly and asked to see more specimens. By the end of our conversation, he'd bought 3 pearls and asked for our contact information for future orders. Word spread the way it does at these events. One satisfied customer becomes a walking advertisement. The cowboy turned out to be a custom jeweler from Dallas who specialized in unique pieces for clients who wanted something nobody else could get. His endorsement carried weight with other vendors and customers who'd been skeptical about pearls from a Georgia swamp. By Sunday afternoon, we'd sold 28 of our 37 pearls. The total came to just over $43,000, not counting the business cards we collected from people wanting to be notified when our next harvest was ready. Sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone to find the real treasure. The success in Austin gave us momentum and confidence, but more importantly, it gave us a business model. We weren't trying to compete with mass-produced pearls from commercial operations. We were creating something unique, something with a story, something for people who appreciated craftsmanship and authenticity over brand names and marketing campaigns. Over the next few months, we hit similar fairs in Atlanta, Nashville, and Charleston. Each event taught us something new about our customers and our product. We learned that people loved hearing about my grandfather's secret techniques, about the connection between traditional Japanese methods and innovative American problem solving. Our story sold almost as well as our pearls. By the end of our first year, we generated nearly $240,000 in revenue, not profit. There were expenses for equipment, travel, booth fees, and the constant need to reinvest in expanding our operation. But it was enough to prove that this wasn't just a lucky accident or a one-time windfall. We had built something sustainable, something that could grow. The real breakthrough came after more than 2 years of working together, slowly building and improving our operation, when our own cultivation cycles finally started producing harvestable pearls. These were my grandfather's legacy stock. These were oysters we'd raised from larvae, pearls we'd guided through their entire formation process from the very beginning. When we cracked open that first batch of our own pearls, I felt like a proud parent and a successful entrepreneur at the same time. After months of paperwork battles and bureaucratic hurdles, we finally had all our permits approved and could make things officially official. We registered as Behemoth Pearls, hand-grown legacy. The name captured everything we wanted to represent: respect for the location that made it possible, acknowledgement of the careful cultivation process, and honor for the inheritance that started it all. Getting our business license felt like planting a flag on territory that was finally, unquestionably mine. The paperwork was filed in the same courthouse where my grandfather's will have been read. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was officially registering a business built on the swampland my family had dismissed as worthless. This was my flag flying over the marshes my father had mocked. Proof that sometimes the most valuable things grow in places other people refuse to look. Success has a way of attracting attention, especially in small communities where everyone knows everyone else's business. The first newspaper article appeared in the Savannah Morning News, a human interest piece about the young man who'd turned inherited swampland into a thriving pearl farm. The reporter loved the story of family rejection turned into entrepreneurial triumph. The article caught the attention of a freelance writer for Forbes Local who drove down from Atlanta to see our operation firsthand. She spent a whole day watching us work, interviewing Isabella about the science behind our methods, and photographing pearls that caught the light like captured stars. When her article came out 2 months later, it called me the pearl magnate of the backwoods. That Forbes article changed everything. Suddenly we had inquiries from jewelry designers in New York, collectors in California, and boutique shops in cities I'd never visited. Our waiting list grew faster than we could expand production. The phone rang constantly with opportunities that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. The irony was perfect and bitter. The family that had written me off as a failure was now seeing my face in business magazines, and my story shared on social media. I imagined their expressions when they read about the weirdo who'd built a fortune on the swampland they dismissed. Part of me wanted to frame that Forbes article and mail it to them. The wiser part of me knew that success is its own revenge. The The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, just as Isabella and I were finishing dinner after a long day of harvesting. My phone showed Dad's number, a sight that made my stomach clench with old reflexes. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won over caution. His voice was different, softer, warmer, like honey collected by bees from flowers growing on my own property. He'd seen the articles, he said. The family had been talking. They were proud of what I'd accomplished, amazed by how I'd turned things around. Mom wanted to know if I was eating well. Kevin had questions about my business model. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as reconciliation. Dad talked about family unity, about how we should stick together now that times were good. Mom got on the phone to reminisce about how she'd always believed in me, conveniently forgetting the mad scientist comment and the suggestion that I'd fail at everything I touched. Then came the real purpose of the call. Kevin, with his law school training and business connections, could help me structure things better. Maybe we should consider incorporating as a family business for tax purposes, legal protections, estate planning. All very reasonable suggestions delivered with the kind of concerned authority that had intimidated me for years. But I wasn't the same person who'd left their house with $3,000 and a broken heart. Success had given me something more valuable than money. It had given me perspective. I could hear what they weren't saying, see the calculations behind their sudden concern for my well-being. The conversation went on for nearly an hour, with each family member taking turns to express their newfound appreciation for my achievements and their desire to be part of my success story. They painted a picture of family reconciliation and shared prosperity that might have been tempting if I hadn't spent the last year learning to trust my own judgment. When they finally got around to asking directly about bringing the business into the family structure, I was ready with my answer. It came from a place of calm certainty rather than angry rejection. This wasn't about the money, I told them. This was about who had seen me when others had seen only failure. This was about Grandpa's faith in me, his quiet blessing that had waited in muddy water for years. My final words to Dad were carefully chosen and delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. The man you called a weirdo didn't leave me a farm. He left me faith. And that's not something you can incorporate or inherit or take away with legal paperwork. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough for me to count my heartbeats. When Dad finally responded, his voice had lost its honeyed warmth and returned to the familiar tone of disappointment I'd grown up with. That was fine. I'd learned to live without their approval, and I wasn't about to trade my independence for their belated acceptance. After I hung up, Isabella and I sat on my trailer's front steps, watching the sun set over the pond that had changed everything. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror that showed the future instead of the past. Somewhere beneath that surface, thousands of oysters were slowly creating treasures that would fund dreams my family couldn't imagine and wouldn't understand. The real victory wasn't the money in the bank or the articles in magazines. It was the knowledge that I'd proven something important to the only person whose opinion truly mattered, myself. I'd taken something everyone else saw as worthless and turned it into something valuable. More importantly, I'd learned to see my own worth instead of waiting for others to recognize it. That night, I pulled out my grandfather's journal one more time, reading his careful notes by lamplight while Isabella dozed on the couch. His words seemed different now, less like cryptic instructions and more like a conversation between kindred spirits separated by time but connected by understanding. Sometimes the most precious things in life are the ones other people can't see the value in. Sometimes being forgotten by everyone else is exactly what you need to find yourself. Success, I learned, is like feeding a growing teenager. The more you give it, the hungrier it gets. 3 years after hanging up on my family's reconciliation attempt, Baymouth pearls had grown into something I barely recognized from those early days of muddy boots and desperate hope. We were running 100 baskets now, each holding up to 20 oysters, spread across 3 different cultivation areas that I carved out of what used to be worthless swampland. My life had become a weird mix of farming and scientific experimentation. I actually started talking to my oysters like they were my children, encouraging them to grow faster and shine brighter. The raccoons seemed to have formed their own strategic planning department, constantly devising new ways to get at my baskets. They were like tiny pirates with masked faces and an MBA in creative problem solving. Real success isn't just about the money rolling in. It's about the constant process of learning and adapting, like Darwin's theory in action, but with more spreadsheets and fewer Finches. Every season brought new challenges that forced me to evolve or fail. Algae blooms that threatened to choke out entire sections. Temperature fluctuations that could kill months of careful cultivation. Equipment failures that happen at exactly the wrong moment, usually during storms. But I wasn't the same lost kid who'd arrived here with $3,000 and a broken heart. I'd learned to see problems as puzzles rather than disasters. Each setback taught me something that made the operation stronger. Failure, it turned out, was just success wearing a disguise and teaching lessons you couldn't learn any other way. The breakthrough that changed everything came through an email from Chicago. A jewelry designer named Marcus Goldstein had seen our work at a boutique show in Atlanta and wanted to discuss an exclusive partnership. He wasn't interested in mass production or competing with the big commercial operations. He wanted something unique, something with a story behind it. Marcus turned out to be the same kind of outsider in the jewelry world that I'd been in my family. He was looking for real value instead of mass appeal, stories instead of marketing campaigns. When he visited our operation, he spent hours listening to Isabella explain the science and me ramble about my grandfather's journals. He saw more than just pearls. He saw the narrative that made them irreplaceable. Our partnership with Marcus opened doors I didn't even know existed. His clientele were people who appreciated craftsmanship over brand names, authenticity over advertising. They wanted pieces that nobody else could get, jewelry that came with a story worth telling. Our pearls started appearing in custom pieces that sold for prices that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. But the real game changer was Isabella's idea to build something permanent. The trailer that had been my home and headquarters was fine for a broke kid with nothing to lose, but it wasn't exactly inspiring confidence in high-end clients. We needed facilities that matched the quality of our product and the growing scope of our operation. Construction of a new house started in the spring of our 4th year. Nothing fancy, a modest 2-story that overlooked the ponds where everything had begun. But it was mine, built on land that everyone had dismissed as worthless, funded by dreams that had grown in muddy water. Every nail and board represented a choice to bet on myself when nobody else would. The real innovation was the visitor center we built next to the house. Isabella had convinced me that we could create something completely unique, an educational experience that let people see pearl cultivation in action. The Living Pearl Experience, we called it. Tourists could learn about the process, watch us work with the oysters, even participate in opening shells to find their own pearls. I, the former introvert who'd rather read books than talk to humans, found myself giving tours to groups of fascinated visitors. I'd tell them about my grandfather's secret techniques, about the Japanese methods adapted to Georgia conditions, about the magic that happens in the depths when nobody's watching. I even joked about how my oysters sleep with their shells slightly open, dreaming about their future brilliance. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. The shy kid who'd hidden behind books had somehow become someone who could stand in front of strangers and share his passion with confidence. Success had given me something more valuable than money. It had given me a voice I'd never known I had. We hired local people to help with the expanded operation, former shrimp boat workers who understood water and patience, high school graduates who needed jobs that didn't require leaving Weymouth for the big city. Watching them take pride in work that most people would never understand reminded me why this place had always felt like home, even when I'd had nowhere else to go. The team we built wasn't just employees. They were guardians of something special. Each person who joined our operation became part of a story that started with an old man's faith in his overlooked grandson. They understood that we weren't just farming pearls. We were cultivating dreams in a place where most people saw only stagnant water. My relationship with Isabella had evolved into something that defied easy definition. We were business partners, best friends, and something deeper that neither of us wanted to rush into words. Our evenings were filled with conversations that wandered from business plans to life dreams, from scientific theories to philosophical questions about what makes life meaningful. Her laugh had become better music than the whisper of waves across the pond. Her presence was the anchor in my new world, the constant that made all the changes feel stable instead of chaotic. But we both understood that what we were building together was too important to risk by moving too fast or assuming too much. Grandpa's journal remained my secret weapon and spiritual advisor. I kept finding new details in his notes, observations that helped solve current problems or open up possibilities I hadn't considered. It was like he was still my guiding star, whispering answers from beyond the pages of his old notebooks. One entry I'd somehow missed before contained detailed observations about seasonal variations in pearl quality. Another described a filtration technique that solved a persistent algae problem we'd been fighting for months. Sometimes I wondered if Arthur Hudson had somehow known exactly what challenges I'd face and left me a roadmap disguised as random observations. The media attention continued to grow. Articles in trade magazines, features in regional business journals. A documentary crew from the Discovery Channel spent a week filming our operation for a show about innovative American entrepreneurs. Each piece of coverage brought new customers and new opportunities, but also new competitors trying to figure out our secret formula. Competitors would drive down from Atlanta or up from Florida, claiming to be potential customers while obviously trying to reverse engineer our methods. They'd ask detailed questions about water chemistry and cultivation techniques, take photos when they thought nobody was looking, but they were missing the point. They could see the water, but not the depths where the real magic happened. The irony of my success wasn't lost on me. The family that had written me off as a failure was now seeing my story featured in publications they actually read. Forbes had done a follow-up article about sustainable aquaculture and innovative agriculture. The Wall Street Journal mentioned our operation in a piece about rural entrepreneurship. I'd become the poster child for turning rejection into success. Sometimes I'd imagine their faces when my name popped up in their news feeds or their business magazines. The weirdo who'd run off to play mad scientist in the swamp had built something that commanded respect in circles where respect wasn't easily earned. Success, it turned out, was indeed its own revenge, but a much more satisfying kind than anger or bitterness. 5 years after that first golden pearl changed my life, I stood in my house looking out over an operation that employed 12 people and generated more revenue than I'd ever dreamed possible. But the real treasure wasn't in the bank account or the business statistics. It was in the knowledge that I'd honor my grandfather's faith by becoming someone worthy of his belief. The original pearl from basket number 4 still sat in its place of honor next to Arthur's photograph. I'd never sold it, never even considered selling it. It was priceless not because of its market value, but because it represented proof that even the silent can make themselves heard. They just speak in the language of brilliance instead of words. That pearl was my relic, silent testimony to my victory over betrayal and my discovery of a voice I'd finally found within myself. It reminded me every day that the most valuable treasures are often invisible to the naked eye, just like the most important lessons in life. Real wealth isn't just money. It's the recognition of your own worth that nobody can take away. Looking back on the journey from family disappointment to successful entrepreneur, I realized that every rejection had been a redirection. Every moment of feeling forgotten had been preparation for finding myself. Every time someone had told me I was enough, the universe had been setting me up to prove that I was more than enough. The phone rang one afternoon while Isabella and I were planning the next expansion phase. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Kevin. My brother had somehow tracked down my business line, probably through one of those business directories that make privacy impossible. His tone was different from that manipulative call years earlier. Casual, friendly, like we just talked yesterday instead of having our last conversation, and with me essentially telling the family to leave me alone. He'd heard about the documentary, he said, seen some articles. The family was doing well, by the way. Dad's thinking about retirement. Mom's got a garden club. Everyone's proud of what I'd accomplished. The conversation danced around its real purpose for 20 minutes before Kevin finally got to the point. He was putting together an investment fund focused on sustainable agriculture and aquaculture. Family money. plus some outside investors who were interested in getting into a growing market for ethically sourced luxury goods. They'd love to have Behemoth Pearls as a flagship operation. I listened to his pitch with a detached curiosity of someone watching a movie they'd seen before. The numbers were impressive. The opportunity was real. The benefits he outlined would definitely accelerate our growth and expand our market reach. It was exactly the kind of proposal that a smart businessman would seriously consider. When he finished, I thanked him for thinking of me and told him I'd need to discuss it with my business partner. The silence on his end told me he hadn't expected that response. He probably thought I'd jump at the chance to finally be included in the family's financial success, to be accepted into their world of investment opportunities and strategic partnerships. But I wasn't the same person who'd left their house with hurt feelings and a pocket full of gas station savings. I'd learned that some things can't be bought, borrowed, or inherited. Some things have to be grown slowly, in your own time, under conditions you control. My response came from a place of quiet certainty rather than angry rejection. Thanks, Kevin, but my legacy already has a name, and it was grown on faith, not expectations. The conversation ended politely but firmly. No anger, no bitterness. Just a calm confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. After I hung up, Isabella and I sat on the back porch watching the sun set over ponds that had transformed from muddy water into liquid gold. Somewhere beneath that surface, thousands of oysters were slowly creating treasures that would fund dreams my family couldn't imagine and wouldn't understand. The silence between us was comfortable, full of shared understanding about what we'd built together. I'd become the same book-loving kid who used to hide under oak trees, but now I stood firm like a pearl that had formed under pressure. The transformation hadn't changed my essential nature. It had revealed what had been there all along, waiting for the right conditions to develop. Sometimes to find yourself, you just need to look into the depths where others are afraid to venture. The most precious things in life are the ones other people can't see the value in. Sometimes being forgotten by everyone else is exactly what you need to discover your own worth. And sometimes, when you're patient enough to wait for miracles, the universe rewards your faith with treasures that shine from within. That evening, as Isabella and I sat together on the couch reading grandfather's journal by lamplight, I realized something had shifted between us. The comfortable silence we'd shared for years had transformed into something deeper, more intentional. When I looked up from the weathered pages, she was watching me with eyes that held the same warmth I'd been feeling, but had been too careful to name. 6 months later, we were married in a simple ceremony by the pond where everything had started. No fancy venue, no complicated guest list, just us, a few close friends, and the oysters that had brought us together. Isabella wore a necklace made from our very first successful harvest, pearls that caught the morning light like captured promises. The following year brought us our most precious treasure yet. Our daughter arrived on a crisp October morning, and when the nurse placed her in my arms, I understood what my grandfather had meant about things that grow quietly in their own time. We named her Pearl, partly as a nod to the business that had brought our parents together, but mostly because she was the most luminous thing either of us had ever created. Holding my daughter while looking out over the ponds that had transformed my life, I understood the true meaning of Arthur's final gift. It wasn't the land or the pearls, or even the techniques he perfected. It was a lesson that forgotten can become precious, that betrayal can become independence, and that in silent brilliance, you can finally see yourself not as a shadow, but as light. The golden pearl from basket number 4 still sat in its place of honor next to grandfather's photograph, but now it shared space with our wedding photo and our daughter's first ultrasound picture. These were my real treasures, the symbols of a life built on patience, faith, and the courage to look for value where others saw only murky water. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life are born from pressure and time and patience. Sometimes being forgotten by everyone else is exactly what you need to discover your own worth. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to dive beneath the surface, you find treasures that shine from within, including the most precious pearl of all, the family you choose to create with someone who sees your true value.